People ask me all the time. They ask at weddings when they notice I walked in alone. They ask at family dinners, somewhere between the main course and dessert, usually from the end of the table where the married ones sit. They ask at work, in that casual, slipped-in way people do when they want to sound interested, but are really just measuring your life against their own. Someone you have not seen in 3 years looks you over and says, almost before they say hello, "So, are you seeing anyone?" And when you say no, the expression on their face shifts, not dramatically, just slightly, just enough. A minor recalibration, like you told them something mildly concerning, like the answer was not what they expected, and the follow-up question forming behind their eyes is something closer to what is wrong with you. I have learned to sit with that look. I have had to, because the question does not stop. It mutates, but it does not stop. Sometimes it comes dressed as concern. Sometimes it comes dressed as humor. A man like you, still single? As if being single is a temporary malfunction, that enough time and enough effort should have resolved by now. As if the natural conclusion of a functioning adult life is a shared mortgage and a +1 at every event. As if solitude is the waiting room and partnership is the destination, and anyone still in the waiting room after a certain age must have missed their appointment. I want to talk about that assumption. I want to take it apart slowly and look at what is actually inside it, because the question is not really about my relationship status, it never was. It is about whether the life I am building, on my own terms, with my own standards, at my own pace, is legitimate. And I believe it is. In fact, I'm certain of it. So this is not a defensive answer. This is not an apology. This is an explanation for anyone willing to think carefully about what the alternative actually costs. Section 1. The trade-off. Nobody discusses. Let me reframe this from the start. Being single is not a gap in my biography. It is not a chapter I skipped or a level I failed to complete. It is a choice. And like every meaningful choice, it comes with trade-offs. Trade-offs I have examined, weighed, and consciously accepted. The culture we live in does not talk much about the trade-offs of partnership. It talks endlessly about the trade-offs of being alone, loneliness, isolation, the absence of warmth. These are real, and I do not dismiss them, but nobody sits you down at 22 and walks you through what being in the wrong relationship actually costs. Nobody draws up that ledger with the same seriousness. Nobody asks the man in the unsatisfying marriage whether he is okay. Nobody pulls the man who settled too young, aside at the dinner party, and quietly wonders if he might be missing something. Here's what I know about trade-offs. Every significant decision in life involves surrendering one form of value to secure another. The man who takes the stable corporate job trades autonomy for security. The entrepreneur trades security for freedom. The man who marries young trades open possibility for committed depth. None of these are wrong, but none of them are automatically right either. They are all bets. They are all negotiations. And the question is not whether you are making a trade. You are always making a trade. The question is whether you are making it consciously or by default, whether you are choosing it or simply drifting into it because the current of expectation carried you there. I am not drifting. I want that to be the first thing understood. I am not here because nothing better came along. I am not here because I am afraid or broken or incapable of love. I am here because I made a calculation, and the calculation has not yet produced a result that justifies changing course. That is not passivity. That is discipline. Section 2. The cost of emotional bandwidth. A relationship is not just a presence in your life. It is a demand in your cognitive and emotional resources. And most men are never told this clearly. They are told about companionship, about warmth, about not dying alone, but they are rarely told that every relationship they enter becomes one of the primary operating systems running in the background of their mind at all times. Think about what happens when a relationship is under strain. Think about what that costs you in processing power. You are sitting in a meeting and half your mental bandwidth is on a conversation from last night that did not end cleanly. You're trying to make decisions about your business, your career, your finances, and running in parallel quietly, persistently, is the unresolved tension in a relationship that is not working. That is not a minor inconvenience. That is a tax. A real, measurable tax on your capacity to function at your highest level. Men who study high performance in sport, in business, in any domain that demands sustained excellence, will tell you that mental clarity is one of the most undervalued competitive advantages available. The ability to be fully present. The ability to direct your focus without interruption. The ability to enter a state of deep, unbroken concentration on the thing that matters most. These are not luxuries. They are the foundation of results. Now, I'm not suggesting that good relationships destroy mental clarity. They do not. A solid, well-matched partnership can actually strengthen your focus because you have stability beneath you. A psychological base that does not require constant maintenance. But a bad relationship, an uncertain relationship, a relationship built on incompatibility or unmet expectations or unspoken grievances, that is not neutral. That is subtractive. It takes more than it gives, and often it takes the thing you can least afford to lose, your attention. I would rather carry the weight of solitude, which is a clean, manageable weight I have learned to live with productively, than carry the weight of a compromised partnership that slowly drains the reserves I need for everything else I am building. Solitude is a known cost. A bad relationship is an unpredictable one. And I do not trade predictable costs for unpredictable ones without significant evidence that the reward justifies the risk. Section 3. The difference between loneliness and solitude. When people hear the word single, what they hear underneath is the word lonely. This is the conflation that drives most of the pity, most of the unsolicited advice, most of the concerned expressions at dinner tables. But loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. They are not even close to the same thing. And the failure to distinguish between them is one of the great misdiagnoses of modern social life. Loneliness is involuntary. It is the experience of wanting connection and not having it. It is an ache, a reaching towards something absent. It is real, it is painful, and it deserves acknowledgement. But solitude is something else entirely. Solitude is chosen. Solitude is the deliberate experience of being with yourself, not as a consolation prize because no one better is available, but as something intrinsically valuable, as a practice, as a resource. The thinkers, builders, and men of serious substance throughout history have understood this. Marcus Aurelius, a man surrounded by the entire machinery of Roman imperial life, constantly attended, constantly demanded of, kept a private journal of philosophical reflection that became one of the most durable works of wisdom in recorded history. He was not lonely. He was in conversation with himself. Thoreau went to Walden not because he could not find company, but because he understood that depth of thought requires distance from noise. Nikola Tesla worked in near total isolation for the periods that produced his most significant breakthroughs. These are not cautionary tales about men who should have found partners sooner. These are examples of men who understood that certain kinds of clarity are only available in certain kinds of quiet. The modern man is rarely alone. He is bombarded by notifications, by social obligations, by the continuous background noise of other people's opinions about his life. In that environment, solitude is not a symptom of social failure. It is an act of self-preservation. I know what my solitude produces. I know what I've built in it, what I've thought in it, what I've understood about myself and the world, in the hours that were not divided between my needs and someone else's. There is a work I have done in that space that I could not have done any other way, not because partnership would have prevented it, but because the version of me that existed in past relationships had less of himself available for the work, and the work matters. To me, it matters enormously. Section 4. Autonomy is not selfishness. There is a word people reach for when a man talks about protecting his time, his space, his priorities. That word is selfish, as if the desire to live according to your own design is something you should outgrow, like a childish habit. As if maturity means surrendering your preferences to the management of a shared life, whether or not the partnership is worthy of that surrender. Autonomy is not selfishness. Autonomy is sovereignty. It is the ownership of your own time, your own energy, your own direction. And it is one of the most important things a man can cultivate before he enters any serious partnership, because you cannot contribute something you do not possess. The man who has never learned to own himself completely cannot give himself fully to anything or anyone. He can only offer the anxious and negotiated version of himself that has spent years trying to satisfy competing demands without ever establishing what his own demands actually are. I am in a period of building myself, not as a project with a completion date, but as an ongoing commitment. My health, my financial foundation, my craft, and whatever form that takes, my understanding of the world, and of what I actually value beneath the surface of what I was told to value. This work requires room. It requires space to fail and correct and fail again, without the added dimension of how my failure affects a partner, how it reads in a shared household, how it lands inside a relationship that is watching me and measuring me and needing me to be more stable than I currently am. A man in the early or middle stages of his self-construction is not the most available partner. He knows this, or he should. And it takes a certain kind of honesty to look at yourself and say, not yet. Not because the desire is not there, but because the foundation is not ready. Because the version of you that is ready to build something lasting with another person is still a few years ahead of the version standing here now. That is not a failure, that is self-awareness, and self-awareness in men is rarer and more valuable than we give it credit for. The man who enters a relationship before he is ready does not give that relationship his best self. He gives it his most confused self, his most reactive self, his most uncertain self. And the relationship often suffers accordingly. He may stay. He may build a life that looks correct from the outside, but somewhere underneath the surface, he and the person he chose are both living with the gap between what was chosen and what was possible. And that gap does not close easily. Section 5. The financial architecture of the single life. Let us talk about money. This conversation is almost never had honestly in the context of relationship status, and I think the evasion is deliberate. Because if you look at the numbers clearly, the pictures are more complicated than the cultural script suggests. There is a version of the financial argument for partnership that is straightforward and real. Shared costs, dual income, pooled resources. Two people living together spend less per person than two people living separately. This is true. It is a real economic advantage, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. But this calculation only holds under a specific set of conditions. Namely that the partnership is functional, stable, and aligned. The moment it is not, the economics reverse with startling speed. Divorce in most Western jurisdictions is financially catastrophic for men. The median divorce settlement represents a dramatic restructuring of assets accumulated during the marriage, and depending on jurisdiction, income disparity, children, and duration of marriage, it can involve support obligations that extend for years or decades beyond the end of the relationship itself. The man who marries and then divorces, which describes roughly 40 to 50% of marriages in most developed countries, often exits the process with less than half of what he entered, and in some cases, with ongoing obligations that constrain his financial mobility for the remainder of his earning years. I want to be clear. This is not an argument against marriage. It is an argument for knowing what you are signing. Marriage is a legal contract with real financial implications, and a man who signs it without understanding what he is agreeing to is not romantic. He is uninformed. The decision to marry should be made with full awareness of the stakes, not in a cloud of emotional momentum or social pressure. And the decision to remain single while that clarity is still developing is not cynical. It is prudent. Beyond the formal legal dimension, there is a subtler financial argument for the single life in the right phase. The single man, particularly the one who is disciplined and focused, has a level of financial agility that is difficult to replicate in a shared life structure. He can take career risks that a man with shared expenses and shared obligations cannot. He can move cities, pivot industries, spend 2 years building something uncertain without the weight of another person's financial security resting on his decisions. This agility is temporary, and it is worth using while it is available. The single man who uses this window strategically, who builds his financial foundation, eliminates his debt, establishes income that does not depend on a single employer, and creates the kind of stability that makes future partnership an addition rather than a necessity, enters any future relationship from a position of strength. He is not looking for someone to complete his financial picture. He already has a financial picture. He is looking for someone to share a life that is already worth sharing. Section 6. What the cultural script leaves out. There is a script. You probably know it. You have been handed it in fragments since childhood, through films, through songs, through the structure of nearly every story that was ever told to you about what a successful life looks like. The script says, meet someone, fall in love, commit, settle, build a family. It says this is the architecture of a meaningful life, and it says it so consistently and from so many directions at once that questioning it feels almost transgressive, like you are not just rejecting a social norm, but rejecting the possibility of happiness itself. But scripts are written for audiences, not for individuals. They are written for the statistical average, the narrative median, the version of human life that is legible from a distance. They are not written for you specifically, for your psychology, your history, your particular combination of what you need and what you can give. They are a starting point, not an instruction manual. And the man who follows a script without interrogating it is not living a life. He is performing one. What the cultural script leaves out is this. The cost of the wrong partnership is higher than the cost of no partnership. The man who chooses poorly, who enters a commitment he is not ready for, or that is not right for him, who stays in something damaging because leaving requires confronting his own failure to choose well. That man pays a price the script never mentions. He pays in years, in energy, in the slow erosion of his own sense of self as he bends and adjusts and compromises across thousands of small daily moments until the person looking back at him in the mirror is someone he does not entirely recognize. And the script does not hold him blameless for this exactly, but it also does not help him avoid it, because the script does not emphasize discernment. It does not tell you how to evaluate compatibility with the same rigor you would apply to a business decision. It does not teach you how to distinguish between attraction and alignment, between excitement and substance, between someone who makes you feel alive in the moment and someone who will still be making you feel alive 20 years from now, when the excitement has long since settled into something quieter and harder to sustain. The script also does not prepare you for the reality that many people who appear to want partnership are actually looking for something else. They are looking for validation, for stability they cannot create themselves, for a witness to their life who will confirm that the life is meaningful and on track. These are understandable desires, but they are not the same as wanting to build something with you specifically. And the man who cannot distinguish between being wanted and being needed, between being chosen and being convenient, is going to make expensive mistakes. Section 7. The digital distortion. We need to talk about what the internet has done to this, because the modern single man is navigating his relationship life inside an environment that has been deliberately engineered to distort his perception of what is available, what is normal, and what he deserves. Dating applications have industrialized the selection process. They have turned what was previously a slow, organic, socially embedded experience, meeting people through shared environments, shared friends, shared time, into something more closely resembling an e-commerce transaction. You scroll, you evaluate, you match or you do not, and then you talk briefly through a medium that strips out nearly all of the information that actually matters when assessing compatibility. Physical presence, social behavior, how someone treats a stranger, how they carry themselves when they do not know they are being watched. The result is a paradox that researchers in behavioral economics have documented thoroughly. The more options are available, the harder it becomes to choose, and the less satisfied people are with the choices they make. This is the paradox of choice applied to human relationships, and it is genuinely corrosive. It creates a permanent background suspicion that the current option is not quite right, because a potentially better option is always one more swipe away. It trains people, men and women both, to evaluate rather than invest. To keep a door open that commitment would require closing, to hedge. Social media compounds this in a different direction. It creates a curated, optimized, heavily filtered version of other people's relationship lives that is presented as representative of actual relationship lives. You see the vacation photographs and the anniversary posts and the publicly declared affections and the evidence of warmth and humor and compatible personalities, and you see none of the negotiations that produce those photographs, none of the tension underneath the anniversary, none of the private costs of maintaining the public performance. A man who benchmarks his love life against what he sees on social media is comparing his internal reality to someone else's external presentation. He is comparing the full complexity of his own experience, with all its ambiguity and doubt and imperfection, to a carefully selected sequence of the best moments from someone else's. This is a competition no one can win, and it is not even a real competition, because the thing he is comparing himself to does not exist in the form he is perceiving it. I have made a deliberate decision to significantly reduce my exposure to this material, not out of bitterness or defensive,ness, but out of simple information hygiene. If you would not let a stranger into your home to rearrange your furniture, you should think carefully about letting algorithmically curated emotional content rearrange the furniture of your expectations. The algorithm does not have your best interests in mind. It has its own retention metrics in mind. These are not the same thing. Section 8. The discipline of discernment. Discernment is not the same as being picky. I want to separate these two things clearly because the conflation of them is used to dismiss a kind of careful, deliberate selectivity that is actually a sign of maturity rather than a sign of unrealistic expectations. Being picky is about surface criteria. It is about a checklist of physical and lifestyle attributes that must be satisfied before investment begins. It is superficial, and yes, when applied too rigidly, it closes doors that should remain open. But discernment is different. Discernment is about character, values, and alignment. It is about the slow work of understanding what you actually need in a partner, not what you want in a fantasy, but what you need in a reality. And refusing to accept a significant substitution just because the alternative is continuing to wait. The questions I ask now when I meet someone are not the questions I asked at 22. At 22, the questions were immediate. Is there attraction? Is she interesting? Does she make me feel good? These are not bad questions. They are just incomplete ones. The questions I ask now are structural. How does she respond to disappointment? How does she behave when she does not get what she wants? Does she have a functional relationship with her own family? What is her relationship with money? Not in terms of how much she has, but in terms of the anxiety or the ease with which she relates to it. Does she have her own convictions, or does she reflect mine back at me? These questions take time to answer. They cannot be answered on a first date or a second or even a third. They require observation across a range of circumstances, and most people are presenting their best selves during the period when those questions are being asked. This means that real discernment requires patience. It requires the ability to sit with uncertainty about a person for longer than is comfortable, to resist the pull of premature commitment that comes from the desire for resolution. Many men, and many people generally, hate the ambiguity of the middle period of getting to know someone. They want to know what this is. They want to categorize it. They want to make a decision and move forward and stop living in the uncertain space between possibility and reality. But rushing past that middle period is where most of the expensive mistakes happen. The man who commits before he really knows the person, who lets the intensity of early attraction serve as a substitute for the kind of knowledge that only time produces, will eventually find himself in a relationship with a person he did not actually choose. He chose the version of that person that was presented during the courtship. He is now living with the complete version, and those two can be remarkably different. Discernment is the antidote to this, and discernment takes time. It requires, among other things, a willingness to be single for periods that feel longer than they should, because you're not settling the question of whether someone is enjoyable to be around. You're settling the question of whether this is someone you can build something durable with, and these are not the same question. Section 9. Standards are not walls. I have standards. I say this without apology and without the half-embarrassed qualification that people sometimes add when they admit to having standards, as if standards are something you should not quite own in polite company. I have standards about character, about how people treat others when there is nothing to gain, about honesty, not just the dramatic kind, not cheating, not lying, but the everyday kind. Whether someone tells you a small truth that is inconvenient rather than a comfortable version of it, whether they are capable of disagreement that is not destabilizing, whether they can be wrong about something without it becoming a crisis of identity. Standards are not walls. They do not prevent connection. They direct it. They are the filter through which you decide where your investment is most likely to produce something genuinely valuable rather than something that merely resembles value at first and reveals its cost over time. A man without standards is not more available for love. He is more available for the wrong kind of it. There is a common argument made against high standards, that they are a form of fear dressed up as preference, that the man who insists on certain qualities is really just using those qualities as a way to avoid the vulnerability of real intimacy, that the standards are a defense mechanism, more than a genuine set of values. And I will grant that this can be true. I have met men for whom this is true, men who have constructed an elaborate architecture of criteria that no actual human being can fully satisfy, not because they genuinely needed all of those things, but because the gap between their criteria and reality protects them from ever having to commit. That is not what I am describing. What I am describing is something more precise. I am describing the awareness developed over time and at genuine personal cost of what I actually need in a partnership versus what I can live without. And this awareness is maybe more selective, yes. It is also maybe more open in certain ways, because when you are clear about what actually matters to you, you stop wasting energy on the things that do not. You stop pursuing people who look right on the surface but lack the substance you need underneath. You stop performing compatibility. You just wait for the real thing. Section 10. The psychological work. Nobody talks about. Here is something that does not get said enough in conversations about why men are single. A significant number of them are using their time alone to do the internal work that will make them capable of the kind of partnership they want. And this work is serious. It is not comfortable. It is not the pleasant, self-flattering version of personal development that gets sold in weekend retreats and best-selling books with minimalist covers. It is the unglamorous, sometimes genuinely painful work of understanding your own patterns. Most men carry relational patterns from early in their lives that they do not fully understand and have not examined. Patterns learned in their first family. Patterns learned from their earliest experiences of love and disappointment. These patterns around vulnerability, around conflict, around how to behave when you need something and are afraid to ask for it, they tend to get activated in intimate relationships. They go quiet when there is no one close enough to trigger them. And many men mistake this quiet for resolution. They think because the pattern is not visible, it has been dealt with. It has not been dealt with. It has been dormant. And the man who enters a serious relationship without examining these patterns will find them reactivated, often at exactly the worst possible moments, in exactly the ways he least expects. He will become reactive when he intended to be calm. He will withdraw when what was needed was presence. He will realize, somewhere in the middle of an argument that should have been minor, that he is not really responding to the present moment. He is responding to something older and more loaded that the present moment has accidentally unlocked. I have been doing this work. In therapy and journals and the long, honest conversations with older men I trust enough to ask hard questions of. I have been mapping my own patterns with the same methodical attention I would bring to anything else I wanted to improve. And I will tell you this. It is one of the most valuable investments I have ever made. Not because it has made me perfect. I am emphatically not perfect. But because it has given me a degree of self-knowledge that makes me a better partner in theory and a better person in practice. And because it has given me the ability to enter a relationship in the future without importing all of the unexamined baggage that would have made it harder than it needed to be. The world does not celebrate this work in men. It barely notices it. A man in therapy is still a slightly unusual thing. A man who talks openly about his emotional patterns is still, in certain environments, received with a discomfort that reveals how deeply we have trained men to equate emotional opacity with strength. But the men I know who have done this work, who have looked honestly at themselves and done something about what they found, are better, stronger, more capable partners than the men who skipped it. They are also significantly more at peace with themselves, and that peace is visible. It changes the quality of every relationship they have, romantic or otherwise. Section 11. What I am actually waiting for. I want to be precise about this because imprecision here invites the wrong conclusions. I'm not waiting for perfection. I'm not waiting for a person who has no complications, no history, no unresolved pieces of their own. I am not waiting for someone who fits a catalog of requirements that together describe a fictional person rather than a real one. That is not what I mean when I say I am being selective. What I'm waiting for is someone whose complexity I can genuinely meet, someone whose history I can hold without feeling overwhelmed by it, someone whose values and mind point in the same general direction, even when we arrive at specific questions from different angles. Someone for whom honesty is not just an occasional practice, but a baseline commitment, who will tell me something true and difficult before they tell me something comfortable and false. I am waiting for the kind of chemistry that is not just physical, though physical chemistry matters and I do not pretend otherwise, but the rarer kind that happens when two people's minds move at a similar speed and in a similar direction. When conversation is not work. When you can be in the same room in silence, and it is not an absence of something, but a presence of something. When you can disagree completely and still respect each other when the disagreement is over. I am also waiting for the readiness in myself that I described earlier. There are pieces of my own foundation that are not yet what I need them to be. That is honest, and I would rather say it plainly than paper over it by rushing into something that would require me to pretend otherwise. The man who knows his limitations and works on them is more trustworthy than the man who does not acknowledge them. And I want to be trustworthy. In the deepest sense of that word, not just reliable in the small logistical ways, but reliable in the ways that actually matter. Stable when things are hard, honest when it costs something, Present when everything in you wants to disappear. Section 12, on pressure, timelines, and who gets to decide. There is a timeline embedded in the question people ask me. Underscore quote underscore 2. Underscore implies that there is a point by which I should have resolved this. A window. A reasonable outer boundary beyond which the continued absence of a relationship becomes evidence of something concerning rather than something chosen. I reject this timeline, not out of rebellion for its own sake, but because I have never seen a compelling argument for why it exists or why it should apply to my specific life. The timeline was designed for a world in which people needed partnership earlier in life for structural reasons. Economic dependency, social legitimacy, the biological constraints on having children that are real but have different weight for men than for women, the shorter lifespans that made delay more costly. Some of these constraints are less binding than they were. Some of them still apply. But even where they apply, they are arguments for awareness and consideration, not arguments for urgency. Who gets to decide when I should be in a relationship? Not the people at the dinner table, not the culture industry, not the algorithm, not the well-meaning relative who confuses their own path with the universal path. I am the one living this life. I am the one who will bear the consequences of the choices I make within it. The people asking the question will not. They will express concern, and then they will go home and live their own lives, and whatever I decide will have zero impact on them and total impact on me. Under those conditions, I cannot think of a less credible source of guidance. Pressure as a mechanism for producing good decisions. It's almost entirely useless. Pressure produces speed, not quality. Pressure produces the decision that resolves the social discomfort, not the decision that serves the actual life. The man who marries because he was tired of explaining himself has not solved his problem. He has traded one uncomfortable conversation for a much more expensive and prolonged series of uncomfortable realities. The social pressure is temporary. The consequences of the decision are not. Section 13. What this life has given me. I want to end this particular section not with a defense, but with a genuine accounting, because if I am honest about the costs of this life, I need to be equally honest about what it has produced. It has given me time, real time, unscheduled, unaccountable, deeply mine. Time I have used to read, to travel to places that were entirely my choice, to pursue work that I find genuinely meaningful without calibrating it to someone else's needs or preferences. Time I have used to become better at things I care about. Time I have used to sit with difficult questions until I had real answers rather than provisional ones. It has given me friendships that are deeper than they would have been if my primary emotional investment had been directed elsewhere. Male friendship is something we do not value enough in this culture. The deep, honest, tested kind, built through shared difficulty and the willingness to be known, is genuinely rare and genuinely sustaining. I have several friendships of this quality, and I do not take them lightly. They are part of the infrastructure of my life in a way that many men in long-term relationships report losing access to, as the demands of partnership and parenthood absorb the time and energy that would have maintained them. It has given me a relationship with myself that I consider genuinely valuable. The ability to spend time with myself without the distraction of noise or the need for constant stimulation or company. The ability to tolerate my own thoughts, to sit with discomfort rather than reaching for something to numb it. This sounds small. It is not small. A man who cannot be alone with himself is going to bring a kind of desperate neediness to every relationship he enters. And that neediness, however understandable its origins, will eventually damage whatever he is trying to build. And it has given me the clarity of knowing what I actually want, not what I was supposed to want, not the version of desire shaped by what I was shown in films when I was 12, the real version, the one that emerged slowly from actual experience and actual reflection and the real cost of some decisions I made that were wrong. That clarity is worth something. It is worth a great deal, actually. So, why am I still single? Because I have not yet met the person whose presence in my life would be worth more than the life I have built in her absence. And I say that without bitterness, without defeatism, without any hidden code for I have given up. I say it as a straightforward statement of observed reality. The life I have built is not a consolation. It is not a waiting room. It is the actual life I am living, and it has genuine value, and I am not interested in disrupting it for the sake of satisfying an external expectation that was never about me in the first place. Because I understand what I am bringing to a partnership, and I understand what I need from one, and I have not yet encountered the specific combination that makes the trade-offs clearly worth making. This is not a low bar. It is the correct bar, the bar that is proportional to how seriously I take the decision. Low bars produce low results. I'm not interested in low results in any area of my life. I'm not going to make an exception for the area that matters most. Because I've spent years learning to be genuinely comfortable in my own skin. Not the performed version of comfort, not the confident mask that conceals a constant low hum of anxiety about whether I am enough, but the real thing. And I did not arrive at that comfort by accident or by default. I arrived at it through work, through the honest, unglamorous, poorly rewarded work of becoming someone I actually respect. And I am not going to abandon that achievement for a relationship that asks me to be less than I am. Because the question everyone keeps asking, why are you still single, is the wrong question. It assumes that being single is a problem requiring an explanation. It does not. It is a state, a neutral state that can be inhabited well or poorly, productively or wastefully, with intention or without it. The question that actually matters, for me, for anyone, is not whether you are in a relationship. It is whether you are building something worth building. Whether you are becoming someone worth becoming. Whether the choices you are making today are producing a version of your life, 5 and 10 and 20 years from now, that you will look back on with the clear-eyed sense that you used your time well. I believe I am. And until the right person enters this life, I will keep building it, with intention, without apology, on my own terms. Because that is not a man who is still waiting for his life to begin. That is a man whose life is already underway, and that is the only answer I owe anyone.